Thank you very much, panelists. So the last speaker, Bright, spoke about urbanization. And we know that in Ghana, just like in most other countries across Africa, there's a rapid process of urbanization that's taking place. And population growth is, or has outstripped the provision of infrastructure. And so as companies like yours seek to expand, I guess it provides opportunity for some of the companies that are represented here today. So I'd like to start with you, Honorable Deputy Minister. You shared with us the Railway Master Plan. But when Honorable Minister of Trade spoke earlier today, he also made mention of the constraints that we have as a country in terms of financing, etc. So before I come to other panelists to give their views on this, I'd like to hear from you, maybe in just a few words. What is the policy? How are we intending to proceed as far as railways is concerned, given the various constraints that we have?
Thank you, Vish. Well, as a ministry, we're looking at various funding models, and we're looking at partnering with the private sector. We're looking at, for various phases of development of the master plan. We're looking at government taking part of the construction process in terms of funding. For some lines, given the available offtakes we have, we are looking at private sector participation where we connect this development with mining operations. We are looking at offtakes like, for instance, if you take cocoa board, we are working with cocoa board to see how we can transport cocoa to the ports and get companies that are interested in haulage to take up these arrangements. But then you're looking at purely government finance, PPP models, various models of the PPP, whether it's BOT, whether it's BOOT, all these arrangements are being considered. But they are tied to particular lines, so you don't have a one kind of fit-all operation. We look at the line and we see to the specific arrangements we can have for that particular. But before the funding arrangements, you understand that investors will want to see what climate you're operating in. So for now, we are confident that the political, economic climate is not that bad. We are quite good in terms of the climate. We are looking at the regulatory framework. We are reviewing our master plan. We are looking at the Act itself. I'm talking about Railway Act. And we are looking to create a regulator out of the Act. So we are actually reviewing the Act to separate regulations from infrastructure management and ownership. And the regulator is going to look at not only the safety issues, we're looking at economic regulation as well, so that we are going to talk about tariff setting, because we all know that with rail, usually your returns are good on freight, but you have to look at subsidizing the passenger service and all that. So the new regulator is going to look at all these factors. We're looking at another policy we call transit-oriented development, where we are not just looking at the tracks, but we want to connect railway operations to operations like what my Apollonia is doing. So you have development that come around the rail stations. You're looking at real estate, shops, all that you want to talk about. When you get to a station, you want to have access to all these facilities before. So for instance, you look at arriving at St. Pancras station, or you look at Paddington, you see the development around the station itself. So the station creates its own hub, economic hub, that will generate employment and all that. And then we are looking at linkages between agriculture and mining centers as well, because the history of the rail itself is one of war and mining. If you understand how our railways came about between 1898 to around 1913, it was purely to transport soldiers into the interior to subdue the kind of attacks that were coming from the mainland. So by I'm just giving a brief history of it, you realize that all the plan will tell you that the major old lines are connected to mining centers. And it was purely because you mine, use the workers for economic activity and also for war operations, to safeguard the borders and all that. There's an interesting research that tells us that by 1913, the Gold Coast had become the richest of the colonies. because of the railways. When the rails came, it became the richest colony. Cocoa boomed. And there was food shortage because everybody now went into cocoa planting. So ours is of history that is replete with success and hope and all that. But now we have to rekindle all that. So opportunity will come when the investments come. As to how we're going to fund what you just asked, it's a question of having this, what the economists call the animal spirit. We need bold people with real imagination of what has happened before and what can happen. If you want to go into the details, I know we're going to have side meetings and all that. I want to relate to a story I heard from Mo Ibrahim, who said that when he wanted to bring the mobile handsets to Africa, the questions people were asking him is, wow, you want to take mobile handsets to where people can't get food to eat? When they realized that when you bring mobile handsets to Africa, people have 3, 4, 5. They don't keep one. By the time he had seen that, people realized that, well, they were too late in catching up with him. And that is what can happen with rail. Some of the linkages are difficult to determine now because you can only determine the effect after the infrastructure itself comes about. So don't be scared about the funding. I know it's huge investment. Progress will tell you that investing in rail is quite huge. Yes. But please, you're welcome. We can do wonders in rail.
Okay,
so,
thank you, Deputy Minister. So basically what I'm hearing is that our vision for rail goes beyond the current lines that we have. And therefore, for those potential partners out there who are interested in railways, we're open to ideas about new routes and new lines that may fit in with the urbanization that we're seeing. So let me go to Progress Rail, Joseph from Progress Rail. I mean, you've seen this and you've done it in different countries. What do you see in Ghana? Where are some of the bright spots and perhaps some of the things that we need to iron out to make this very attractive?
It's, actually, it's funny you say St. Pancras. I actually just had a coworker of mine go to London for the first time, and I said, if you want to see the future of passenger rail, go to St. Pancras. Because it's very pertinent. I think it aligns itself with downstream petroleum as well, where they make a lot more money on the candy inside than they do the fuel they're selling. And so passenger rail, you're right, is heavily subsidized. It is predominantly funded by the freight movement. What I see here and resonates with me and the development I've seen in other countries is you actually do have an existing mine. You've got a source of revenue here that is currently underutilized, and with small investments in that line, you can then see yourself to funding, actually self-funding a portion of the most critical new track development, and then ultimately the passenger space. And so if you look at it from an investment portfolio, investment horizon, certainly there's access to the capital markets globally. But you also want to have a certain element that is self-funded. And again, meeting with your department yesterday, what resonated with me is you've got underutilized mine, you've got the source of revenue, the source of profitability. It's just a matter of now of investing in critical assets today. And we're talking not 100 million, we're talking 10, 20 million US dollars to get those assets operating today, again, to create this self-funded model.
Okay, well that sounds very hopeful. Let me come to Bechtel, who, I mean, you do all the heavy lifting, let me put it that way. Again, maybe infrastructure generally in Ghana. What do you see? What is your sense? And are there any areas that we need to do better at to encourage partnerships with US firms and others?
Well, first coming to the Deputy Minister's comments around different models of financing, I think that's absolutely critical, especially when you're talking about linear projects. They're very difficult to finance purely on the private sector, so you got to look at that right model. Secondly, both of you talked about a project, St. Pancras, which is one of the projects we designed and built, so personal to us, so thank you. And talking about that model, you really got to look at the infrastructure as a whole. You got to be looking at what's the infrastructure around it that's feeding into it. We did, Bechtel built a light rail project out in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm from. And as part of that development and bringing partial private financing to it, it was land developments. And so we actually built around that on the commercial spaces, which helped from the anchor of actually financing the infrastructure. So you got to be looking at that whole value chain, not just that piece of infrastructure. I think one of the key things that we look at is really government's visions, which you definitely have, and it's clear where you want to go with that. The question is, how do you kickstart it? So how do you get the infrastructure going to where private investment comes in? Sometimes if you start, as I mentioned, the linear projects with just pure private financing, BOT, PPP to start it, it's so expensive because private equity wants huge returns. The economics behind it just drag on forever, and then ultimately you don't get what you want. So if the government can look at how can they tap into the low interest financing through ECAs or DFIs, then you're able to kickstart it, and then looking at privatizations. And we actually look at it as kind of a hybrid of government using that first element and then private sector building out the rest of it. And I think that's quite important to do. We see huge opportunities in the rail. And you look across Africa, there's lots of countries that want to build roads and highways everywhere, but you need to have the backbone. And you look at what are the commodities here, what's the businesses here, you have the backbone. It's not a single mine that's going to do it. It's not a single cocoa field or any of those aspects, but it's a combination of all those being integrated as part of the economies that will drive the development of that infrastructure. So we see huge potential in that area, and we hope to be involved.
Okay, I think you've all said the same thing basically about the need to look more broadly at the whole chain and the amount of activity around that piece of infrastructure and how to make it work. So let me come to you, Bright, from your experience with Apollonia City, where you are developing, let's say, new settlements, if I can call them that. And I suppose you would be doing exactly that. You'd be thinking about all the associated infrastructure, including the transportation needs of your future constituents and that kind of thing. So what's your experience been, and how do you factor all of these type of things that the other panelists have said in terms of your planning?
Thank you very much. Within our sites. We still have, and most of the feedback that we get from clients in terms of trying to market this to the general public is the distance. So if you see, I think within the brochures that we have there, we're rolling out an advert or a campaign now where we're saying, a place that was far a couple of years ago is not necessarily far today. But if you look at most economies across the globe, infrastructure is key, particularly rail and the right road network to connect, various urban centers. It is a challenging environment, as we said, but again, from our experience, the way we went about it, for instance, is to partner with the local community. We all know the challenges associated with land in Ghana, for instance. The way we went about it is to give the local community carried interest. We have a carried interest within the project. We didn't just purchase the land, but they actually partners of ours, and they are one of our biggest supporters. They actually protect the land for us. We are also rolling out with demand. So we haven't necessarily gone out there. As one of my colleagues said, if you put in private capital into such projects, it's obviously very expensive. Our model is such that the upfront cost is hugely expensive, and so we're rolling it out with demand. Our preference would be to be able to roll it out as quickly as we can, but for us, it doesn't make much sense, and then also it means that once we pass on the cost, our products do not become economical to the general public. One way of looking at it, and we're working very closely with the Ministry of Trade on that, is for instance, Apollonia to be designated as a special economic zone. So again, that is a model that has been used in a number of countries to attract, investors, particularly when, government does not have the funding to be able to roll out some of these projects. You need to create the enabling environment for private capital to come in there. You need to create some incentives for them to be able to come in there, and special economic zones have been used in a number of countries as a way of attracting private capital, and that for us is a clear example of the kind of role that government can assist or play in helping us to develop these type of projects.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll come to the audience in a little while so that you can ask your questions of the panelists. But Honorable Deputy Minister, I can come to you just before we go to the audience. So, I mean, things about support, let me put it that way, to come from government. We've heard that in our kind of setup, it may make sense or make better sense, at least initially, for us as a country to kickstart the process, whether it's rail or any other type of infrastructure, so that it can be cost-effective and maybe affordable for the end users. But we also know that in some cases, as in other African countries, there are issues around permits, licenses, regulatory matters. So just for the benefit of potential investors or trade partners out there, can you give us a sense as to what your ministry in particular is thinking in terms of what level of support or facilitation they're willing to give investors or potential business partners to deal with some of these challenges that often come up for investors who are not very familiar with our environment?
Thank you. Vish, I think you and I know what is going on. I say this because we work closely with PwC on the rail development processes. So I mentioned earlier that we're dealing with reviewing the Railways Act, we're dealing with regulation, we're dealing with review of the master plan. And when it comes to the general access permitting and all that, I can say that we're very open to a lot of innovations that we're trying to change what happens. I mean, the Act itself allows for even a private railroad to be built. That is how flexible and we are with the processes. And as I'm talking to you, a private person is putting up a railroad from Dawa to the port, LMI, and it's all within the rules. So it's quite a flexible regime, it's quite a progressive one, and you're all welcome to have further discussions on that. Once we come up with the reviewed position, two major areas, the PPP policy becomes a law, and then also the Act is reviewed thoroughly. You see that we've opened up, because we're still operating with the old regime, which was quite a closed one, but now it's quite open for progressive business. You understand that we work closely with the PP as well. So our processes are quite transparent, very, very transparent. We have a predictable legal environment as well. You can
Public Procurement Act.
The Public Procurement Authority.
Public Procurement Authority.
PPA. Okay. So that when you come in to participate in the construction process, you go through a lot of processes that are transparent and competitive. So it's not like we're doing a kind of close arrangement where we kind of handpick who we want to deal with. No. We look at the competence, the technical competence, the financial capabilities and all that. So it's quite it's an open process it's quite skilled. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Deputy Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can come to the audience, if there are one or two questions, I'll take them now. And please just introduce yourselves very briefly and ask your question and who you are addressing it to. Thank you.
My name is Felix Ado, and I used to work with Vish, but I'm now a retiree. And I want to go straight to the Honorable Deputy Minister's point that they have a progressive regime in terms of the railway sector. About a few months ago, the storyline was that that sector was fairly locked up. I don't want to put you on the spot, but particular countries were mentioned as having have this whole sector signed, sealed, and practically to be delivered. Now, I know you want to disabuse our minds, especially the audience here, of such a situation. So please, if you can give us a little bit of assurance that we are really open for business and you are looking for investors, especially those sitting on your left and right, to join you. Thank you.
Before you respond, Honorable Deputy Minister, are there any other questions? Maybe if you can take maybe 3 questions if there are, before the Deputy Minister responds. Any others? Okay, over here, Mr. Ivo.
Thank you. My name is Philippe Ivo. I'm also a retiree, just like Felix. We usually meet on the golf course. But one of the things that's coming out is that we need to develop a master plan, not just for one mode of transportation, but across the different modes of transportation. So I would like to hear from the Deputy Minister what progress is being made towards that, because it sounds like it's a very critical element.
Okay, we'll take a question from the lady at the back, and then we'll come to the panel for responses.
My name is Ajoa Edusa Kodie from Recovery Ghana Consortium. We work with addictions, and we bring people in addicted environment to full recovery. My question on the railway issue is, at the moment, I'm most encouraged to see at least plans for development, but as the previous speaker said, the master plan. At the moment, the current railway lines which were there are almost all encroached with residences, shops, and honestly, it's very pathetic. If we want to develop, what is being done to rid the encroachment that is going on along the railway lines for us to think of development? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Deputy Minister, most, or in fact all of those questions are to you, but once you've given your responses, I'll ask other panelists just to make comments based on their experiences from other countries. So please.
Thank you. These are very important questions, especially when they're coming from retirees. The questions themselves are experienced questions. Well, I'll say we are not closed to only, we are open. I would say we are not close to any particular group of, just yesterday, somebody called me and said, we hear you're only dealing with the Russians. Another person calls me and says, we hear you're only dealing with the Chinese. This is all not true. We are going through open processes. We have currently a company, RailNet. I know you might, we're dealing with RailNet. His Excellency the President is currently in South Africa, and he's meeting up with another company that is interested in dealing with our railroads. In fact, they've brought in over 100 coaches for the Western Line. So we're dealing with anybody who can help. We're talking about in excess of $20 billion to do this construction. I don't think we can shut our doors to everybody and say we are dealing with any particular, we are open, transparent processes that any country, any group, any private sector group that wants to come and help develop the lines, you're welcome. It's, I want you to have that clearly, that we recently had an open discussion with the investor public, and we saw various companies coming up from various countries. So we haven't shut our doors or windows to any particular group. Now, you're talking about integration with other transport networks. I mean, the master plan is very clear on that. You have linkages with the road sector, the ports, harbor and air, because that is the way you can facilitate trade and movement and all that. And I always have at the back of my mind that the first action by man against poverty was movement. If you can't move, you can't solve your problems. You can't do a lot of things that you want to do. So we are doing the integration properly with the various sectors, not only the infrastructure sectors as well. I mean, we're talking about dealing with even the service sectors that As, for instance, if you want to have an effective station, I mean, today we're talking about networking all the communities. If you look at reviewing a master plan to capture regional centers, regional capitals, it's because we want to network to hospitals, schools, and all these facilities that we have. So it's quite a comprehensive plan. If we have time, we can go through, but I know we can do that here. Those who are interested, we have a proper presentation, we can look. So if you look at the master plan and what we're seeking to implement, then you realize that there are other opportunities beyond the tracks themselves. So our stations to cities program, for instance, will look at how you can get all the facilities within a community connected. So if you put a fiber optic line along the track, you're virtually networking villages people within those villages who are not likely to be networked in any way, but the rail is going to take these services to them. So it's quite a comprehensive arrangement, and it's quite integrated with all these other networks that the lady asked about. The last questioner, the encroachment and all that, thank you very much for asking this, but if we want to deal with encroachment, we are not going to construct the lines. So what we are doing is that what has been encroached, we are not going to waste our time and litigate on that. I mean, you're dealing with lines that are over 100, corridors that are over 100 years old. And the corridors have been encroached because we left it to decline. Nobody took care of them. I mean, we just left them I mean, legally they'll tell you if you sleep on your rights. I mean, you've left them to go. So we are developing new corridors. We are working with various local authorities, including chiefs. We have JVs with them. So for instance, if you look at the line we are constructing from Tema to Akosombo, every corridor, we have 6 major paramounts on the line, and we've had joint ventures with them. We are acquiring lands around new corridors, because the corridors themselves create new cities. So if you have a railroad in a town, you expand the town, it changes. The trade, economic activity, everything changes there. So where it's encroached, we have to leave them and allow those settlements to grow as they are doing. What we have also done in other corridors where we can't leave the lands to go is that we have negotiated technology has made it possible to shrink we used to live about 100 feet on either side. Now we are working with about 50 feet, which is workable because technology has moved on. I mean, these railroads were constructed somewhere 1898, 1896. And surprisingly, within that period, they did it in less than 5 years. And now it's taken us so many years, we can't even construct these lines, even with the new technologies we have. So we are working on that. Litigation is going to take too long a time. We've avoided that. We are going to construct along new corridors. So for instance, if you look at Accra, we are looking at a mono-light rail in Accra. If we say we're going to use the median from, let's say, Adenta to Circle, you have to confront all the issues that has to do with the overpasses between maybe Akwaji interchange and all that. So we are going to go behind, start from West Africa Secondary School, go behind and arrive at the Tama station or something. So we have our plan, and you're welcome to the plan if you want to see it.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I think that's very encouraging. I was going to ask my panelists to comment on that, but I'm already being signaled about time. So what I'd like to do now is I'll come back to you for a few closing remarks each. But whilst you get that together, if I have time, I'll just take. No, I don't. Okay. All right then. Final comments. All right then. Maybe I'll start from the far end, from Progress Rail. Maybe your final observations or final comments, infrastructure in general, or railways if you prefer. Anything to do with infrastructure?
Just in general, and I'll be quick and recognize the time constraints. So again, thank you for the invitation. We're proud to be here, and I'll echo what my colleague from Bechtel said: is that the number one requirement is that you've got a motivated and committed government, and it's clear that we do here. And so we're excited for the years ahead.
Great, thank you. Honorable Deputy Minister, any final remarks? You've already said a lot.
Well, you're all welcome to the ministry. Those interested in rail development, you're very welcome. I'm happy we have the designers of St. Pancras here. It's been a wonderful, I wouldn't have missed this for anything. I'm waiting for them to come to the ministry so we can work together. Thank you.
So Andrew.
Great. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to further discussions. Just one final comment, which is actually answering the question about master planning. One of the things we're doing in Gabon was a national master plan looking road, rail, special economic zones, and ports. Absolutely critical, and it sounds like the ministry has been doing that. And it's key. You can't have a master plan on one particular sector without incorporating the other sectors. So it's good to see that. In fact, I look forward to further engagement here in Ghana and hope that we can help deliver some of these critical infrastructures.
Thank you very much. And Bright.
Thank you. Final comments. I think that it's very clear that there's a big infrastructure gap, but there's also a lot of opportunities. And so takeaway, particularly as the minister is here as well, is that government needs to identify the right funding and technical partners that they can partner with. In doing that, we also need to make sure we come up with the right framework for investors, because obviously when investors are deploying capital, at the end of the day, they're going to be looking at the returns that come out of it. But it goes without saying that infrastructure is clearly, it has a major catalytic effect on economic activity. It's going to create a number of jobs, which is exactly what the country wants. And so, as a private sector, we are here to partner with the government and other private sector players. We recognize the opportunity, and we're here as a long-term player. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, all too soon, our time is up. Thank you very much for your attention. I guess just to summarize, there's an exciting opportunity, in fact, a number of opportunities in infrastructure. We focused on rail, but infrastructure obviously is beyond rail because, as everybody here has said, we need to look at the whole chain, whether it's energy, whether it's social projects like housing, education, etc., etc. So we hope you found it of interest. I mean, the panelists are available for consultations after this session. In the meantime, please join me in thanking them for their contributions. Round of applause if you will. And we look forward to carrying on the conversation as to how we can partner to develop this country's infrastructure for trade and economic growth. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Vish and his panelists. Thank you so much for your insights. I also look forward to more discussions on the sidelines of this forum. Thank you very much. We want to continue and move straight into the next panel discussion. So let me invite Angela